We are going to be focusing on the voice referendum because that is due on October 14th. So we have 10 days. Fusion's been very public with their stance, or our stance, which is yes. And so we've included that in our links for the meeting tonight and in our newsletter. So do we have some slides to work off, Miles?
Yeah, so the first item, my name is Miles. I'm from, as aforementioned, Meanjin in Brisbane. Now, the first item today is an interview with a woman named Tania Major by a man called Beny Bol from the African Communities Queensland. Tania Major is a Kokoberra woman from Cape York Peninsula, right at the top of Queensland.
We get across the history of Indigenous people in this country as the First Nations people for such a long time. We have always been asking for a voice in our own affairs. We all know that the statistics, the jails, the young jails are full of young black men, and the health system is overrun by sick majority black people with preventable disease. At home in the Cape, we have a large number of youth and young children with a disease that's been eradicated in first world countries. Rheumatic heart disease. Our communities are, the numbers for rheumatic heart disease is just escalated, and we don't have government's insight into or systematic changes in order to combat a preventable disease in a first world country. And we're requesting the things such as the health issues of Indigenous people and incarceration rate, that we be consulted. We have non-Indigenous representative and people who never walked in our shoes or understand the internal struggles that we've had for such a long time in this country, to be part of the solution.
We as a community have seen firsthand what happens when you are outside the system, and when you are outside the institutions that govern the society. So the number of our young people now in the criminal justice system is just alarming. And that is because we are never part of decision-making processes, especially when it comes to delivery of the programs to the families and to the young people. That's what I advocate for every day. So I was working for an organization, a non-governmental organization, for more than 9 years, and my boss was Aboriginal woman, and I was working for Aboriginal Services. And we've done a lot of work in that area, in different prisons, different schools, and different areas across Australia. I know firsthand how decisions have been made on behalf of the Indigenous Australians. And today, we have a chance to make sure that we place them at the center of their decision-making processes. And when things are actually systemic, you know, this is about institutions, there's no accountability. We want to make sure that those institution reforms start within the institutions. The constitutions, the agencies, the organizations, it needs to start here all the way down in order for us to see some practical change. So that is why this is important. There's nothing to be fearful about. It's about empowering the local families, local communities to be in charge of their own challenges. We need to give the responsibilities to the families, to the local communities, because they understand their problems, and we need to listen to them. So we've tried many things over the years, and nothing worked because we have never genuinely included Indigenous people in the decision-making processes. And that's what this is all about. It's not going to change how Australia is governed, because there's that fear out there that something is going to change as soon as people vote yes. It's not going to change our system of government. It's not going to change Australia as a parliamentary democracy. The political system will remain the same. This is about empowering the local communities, our First Nations people, and we've seen what's happening there. Is there anybody who is happy? Australians are very generous people, and nobody is happy to see a large number of Indigenous kids in jail. It doesn't benefit us. Nobody is happy to see that gap in terms of education, in terms of health, and you name it. So it's not in anybody's interest. It is in our best interest as Australians, regardless of where we come from, for Indigenous people to be as the same as everyone else in our country. It's as simple as that. It's not about making anybody else better than the other. It's being equal, and it's looking after each other, and it's the same generosity that they extended to the migrant to come to this country. We came here because Australians are generous, and they took us in so we can build our lives again. So we are asking for the same generosity, so we are all equal. And our Indigenous people, if the gaps still so wide, it costs each and every one of us in one way or another. So we've got to do something. Thank you.
Okay. So that was what? Okay, so that was a interview with, as I said, Tania from North Queensland. All right, from Walking Together from the Heart workshops. So this is from a workshop which I attended in Brisbane, but there's a lot of variations of this going around as well. Some of you might have seen some of this before. So I just wanted to pull out a little bit of content here to talk about the Uluru Statement from the Heart and the process behind it, about what happened with the voice and how it came together. So there was this process started in 2016 and 17 called the Uluru Dialogues, and it was the culmination of a series of 12 regional dialogues from around Australia, and they were specifically designed to be deliberative and in a direct democracy sense. It was run by First Nations people and for First Nations people. We'll hear a little bit more about this later, but there was a very specific design to try and get a strongly representative sample of First Nations people all around Australia as part of these Uluru Dialogues. And they claim it's more consultative than any other process in Australia's history, and I think that's a fair claim based on what I know. And it culminated in Uluru in the First Nations Constitutional Convention. So they developed this process called Voice, Treaty, and Truth, essentially to function as a roadmap to how we can do what was called reconciliation about 20 or 30 years ago, but hasn't really made as much progress as we might have liked. And so the progress of Voice, Treaty, and Truth is to call on Australians to walk together. And the first step is for this enshrined voice to Parliament. And so that agreement making and truth telling can occur on equal terms. And in its simplest summary, the truth is for us as Australians to acknowledge our history, the things that haven't been said, that Indigenous Australians have a voice and a say in matters that affect them. And then together, that means we'll be able to fairly establish a sound basis to walk together in the future and form a treaty like every single other developed nation in the world. They all have treaties with their traditional owners. And so Australia is a significant anomaly on that basis. So the next thing that I wanted to share is a little bit more detail on the actual proposal itself. I think we might go into our first breakout now. So have you ever felt similarly to Tania and Beny from the video? Is prompt question 1. And prompt question 2 is, can you tell us about a time you had a say in a decision that affected you?
So with Tania and Beny, so they were speaking about how they don't have a lot of Indigenous representation in Parliament. I think I can definitely agree with that. There was the joke about Tony Abbott being the self-appointed Minister for Women. Things like that are a slap in the face and make people feel disillusioned about representative politics. So I agree with them there. Can you tell us about a time you had a say in a decision that affected you? Just in general.
How about we go to another person now for the first question?
Yep.
So maybe Michael, would you like to say something?
Yeah, absolutely can. So I from my own personal experience, I have I've a certain level of disillusionment generally with systems and how effective my vote is and all these kinds of things that I think everyone feels. But as a I guess, middle class now. I don't have sort of from working class, semi middle class, sort of white male, having sort of, it's important for me to recognize that there is quite a lot of my life is supported by the current system. I do have certain amount of representation as a sort of as a group, or as a from mostly my sort of socioeconomic class, in lots of cases, but I have both personal and sort of social experience with those who are significantly less represented, and it's something that I do have I'm very conscious about, because I'm being aware of sort of what you might have and what other people don't have, and trying to be as sympathetic as possible for that, I think, is incredibly important. But yeah, generally, I have voted at least in elections where there has been sort of very tight swings that sort of do help to some degree, but those are in cases where it seems like the outcome of those could have some effect. This is mostly around like local elections and things like that. So it's very the main point just being that I definitely acknowledge my representation, the representation that I have, that others do not.
Thank you, Michael. Wade, would you like to say anything to respond to one of these prompt questions?
Yeah, hi. I was just thinking in the respect of medical choices, like we have access to a wide range of medical care and options to choose from. If you don't like one doctor, you can always go see a different one, or if you want a second opinion, there's it's quite available, easily available. So that's something that I think that many Indigenous people might not have, as that's something that we're speaking about in the video.
Thanks. Some random human, I'm not sure who you are, but would you like to add anything? So the breakouts are going to be coming back together very, very shortly. While they're coming in, Bryony, did you want to say something?
I'll just say it's like when you're a kid, you don't get a say in a lot of things that happen to you, and that's kind of, and also in a lot of workplaces you don't get a say into your work environment and so on.
Yeah.
I'll leave it there. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. And Drew, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, no, in context of Bryony's comment there, my example was going to be a work one. I work in a very data analytics oriented part, and the number of times that decisions have been made around what we're doing with things that do not involve me or anyone else who actually deals with the data or analytics, and you're like, these decisions just happen entirely without the people who actually are affected by its involvement.
Ditto, Drew, even though I bet it claims to be an evidence-based organization.
Great. Okay, we've got everyone coming back now. In in the next section, we have another little talk through presentation.
Let's go back to basics here. This is what we're being asked to vote on referendum day or earlier if you vote early, and anything else about it that comes afterwards if successful, and that would just follow the normal parliamentary process as we do with every single other thing we do with laws in Australia. So the question itself, as it will appear on the paper that we are to fill in, we'll be asked to vote yes or no. Let's point out it is technically possible to do an informal vote as well, but they're going to ask us to do yes or no. And the question we're going to be asked to answer on is a proposed law to alter the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. Do you approve of this proposed alteration? That's what we're being asked. And if the answer is yes, I think there's certain number of states that have to agree, then the outcome of that would be a change to the constitution. The constitution can only be changed by referendum and is essentially the foundation document upon which everything else in Australian law and politics is based upon. It's like the root document, so to speak. I'll just go up Miles, and we'll go over. Yeah, we'll go over the 3 points of what would actually appear in the constitution if it's a yes vote. So I'll just go over the quick other stuff, and you know, it's 3 main points there. It's 1, there shall be a body called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice. Okay, so that's just a voice existing. Second point is the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice may make representations to the Parliament and the executive government of the Commonwealth on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So that's just basically saying the voice can make a representation, you know, make a statement essentially. It doesn't say that the Parliament has to accept it or the executive government has to accept it. It just means that they can speak to these government entities, and it has to be a matter relating to Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people. So as long as it affects them in some way, they can make a statement on it. Doesn't necessarily mean that the government has to listen. It doesn't seem very controversial to me so far. And a third point is the Parliament shall, subject to this constitution, have the power to make laws with respect to matters relating to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice, including its composition, functions, powers, and procedures. So what that is saying is that it's not putting the voice above the government, it's placing at all the Parliament, it's placing the voice below the government and the Parliament, so that the Parliament can still control the voice if they should want to. You know, we're hoping that it's politically unpopular that a future Parliament may want to nerf or interfere with the voice. We're hoping that's not going to happen, but it is a possibility. There would be it would be more controversial if they were placed above the Parliament. So you can see the reasoning why it's placed like this to not give it the impression of being some all-powerful body that can control things more than what the Parliament can. So it's up to us to still be politically active, so that the Parliament doesn't derail things in the future. Go on, Miles.
It's something that we can actually pass this out as well for people to look through. But I think the key points are that it'll be community-led and that it will work alongside existing organizations. It won't, but more importantly, it won't have a veto power and it won't have program delivery function. So in a way, it just functions as a lobby group.
A little bit closer to being on par with like mining lobby groups who use their money and influence to get heard. Well, this is a voice for people who don't have such influence to get heard, who really do need to get heard. And I would hope that parliamentarians would start listening to all their constituents in the future, rather than needing this. But this is the situation that we're in, where it is necessary.
Great. Thank you very much, Simon. So there's one more resource now, one more thing we're going to look at, and then we'll go into another round of breakouts.
I'd like to start by thanking Tyrone for his wonderful welcome to country earlier today. I want to acknowledge his peoples, the Ngunnawal peoples, the traditional owners of the land on which we gather. I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and I bring greetings from my Quandamooka peoples from Minjuraba, or North Shrubroke Island as you may know it, just off the coast of Brisbane. It may look like I'm standing here on this stage by myself, but I am not. While you can't see the people standing behind me, I can feel their spirit. My Quandamooka ancestors and generations of other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have been crafting this story for more than 200 years. My story is not my own, nor is it new. It is an old story, and one whose time has come. This story is the Uluru Statement from the Heart. This statement speaks to me because I was closely involved in its creation. My signature, etched into its canvas as I knelt in the red soil of Mutijulu in the shadows of Uluru on the 26th of May, 2017. I remember that moment for many reasons. Seeing the wonder of the yellow-clad Gumatj and the blues and the greens of the Torres Strait dancers kicking up clouds of red on Anangu land. I remember the looks on people's faces, the quiet smiles, the camaraderie of people who, only hours earlier, had brought this statement to life. But most of all, I remember how exhausted I felt. In this moment of such importance to my peoples and my nation, I felt a tiredness in my bones and in my soul. I was utterly spent. And I remember thinking to myself at the time, there's something wrong. I should be feeling enthused and energised about what we'd just done. And then I reflected on everything that had happened to get to this point. I had worked with the Referendum Council as it held 13 regional dialogues with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people across the country. Led by Arnie Pat Anderson, Professor Megan Davis and Noel Pearson, it was the most comprehensive process ever to engage Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in the hard business of constitutional and structural reform. My job was to capture the stories of more than 1,200 people as they gave their hearts and their minds to the dialogues. Standing at the front of the room at each of the dialogues, I could hear and feel the passion, the grief, the hope, the challenges and the ideas of people who had spent decades striving for change. I remember helping shape the agenda and co-facilitating the Uluru Convention. Sitting in my room the night before, was all about to start, thinking of all the work that we'd done up until that point was finally coming to a head. Knowing that more than 250 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people were gathering nearby, preparing to do the hard work of reaching a consensus in the next 3 days, and I had absolutely no idea what that consensus would be. On the morning of the final day of the convention, Megan read the statement for the very first time. At that point, my emotions were just boiling inside of me. I felt an enormous pride in my people for the work that they'd already done. I felt nervous for the reception. I didn't know what the reception to the statement might be. And I was just hanging on to every single word, feeling the tension just ripple through the room. So Megan finishes that reading, and the response was more than 250 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people getting to their feet in a spontaneous standing ovation. I get goosebumps now just thinking about it. It was that real. It was an emphatic endorsement of this statement. This is truly a historic consensus and a compelling mandate for reform. So all of that was weighing on me in that moment of exhaustion. And then I look up and I see Auntie Pat, and I see this look on her face. This just says it all. It shows a lifetime of dedication, of sacrifice, of service to her nation. It shows the triumph of that moment, tinged with a sadness for those that did not live to see it. And it shows the determination to complete the job of weaving the ancient and modern identities of Australia into a more complete whole. In seeing that look on her face, it reminded me that I've been on this scene for about 5 minutes compared to warriors like herself. And in a really strange way, it just allowed me to let that tiredness and exhaustion just slip from my shoulders. And I was able to relax and enjoy that historic moment but I also knew that the real work was yet to come. I want to make a really important point. If you remember nothing else from this talk, remember this. There's a reason why this statement is with me on this stage today and not hanging in the Parliament or the Prime Minister's office. It is not a submission or a petition to the government. It is an invitation to you, the Australian people. The statement commences. We, gathered at the 2017 National Constitutional Convention, coming from all points of the southern sky, make this statement from the heart. Our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tribes were the first sovereign nations of the Australian continent and its adjacent islands, and possessed it under our own laws and customs. This, our ancestors did, according to the reckoning of our culture, from the creation, according to the common law from time immemorial, and according to science more than 60,000 years ago. This sovereignty is a spiritual notion, the ancestral tie between the land, or Mother Nature, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who were born therefrom, remain attached thereto, and must one day return thither to be united with our ancestors. This link is the basis of the ownership of the soil, or better, of sovereignty. It has never been ceded or extinguished, and coexists with the sovereignty of the Crown. How could it be otherwise? That peoples possessed the land for 60 millennia, and this ancient link disappears from history in merely the last 200 years? With substantive constitutional change and structural reform, we believe this sovereignty can shine through as a fuller expression of Australia's nationhood. A unanimous theme across the dialogues across Australia from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples is that First Nations sovereignty has never been ceded. At the Ross River Dialogue, about 100 kilometres east of Alice Springs, with 3 interpreters in the room to take into account the different language groups, people talked about their jukapa, their unshakable connection to their past, present and future. It is their law and it's their way of life. They did not talk about sovereignty as some sort of abstract political concept. In fact, the word itself was barely mentioned. Not because it is unimportant, but because it is so fundamental to who they are, it is impossible to imagine living a life without it. It has never been and will never be ceded. However, the statement doesn't stop at this notion of just Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander sovereignty alone. It does not regard it in isolation, but in coexistence with the sovereignty of the Crown. The fundamental reckoning of these two sovereignties is the settlement that has evaded us as a nation since 1788. In welcoming people to this year's Gama Festival in North East Arnhem Land, my brother and Gumatj elder Jawa Yunupingu summed up this sentiment beautifully when he said, "You will hear us singing tonight, and we will be singing to our ancestors, who are your ancestors too. We will be singing to them to remind them we are here, maintaining our connection to them for their appreciation. And we do this not just for us, but for all of us, because our sovereignty is not a hard and brutal sovereignty. It does not take from others. It does not exclude or steal. Our sovereignty is welcoming." The triumph of this statement is not the proposals it contains or the consensus that it represents. It is that these words come from a place of deep love for each other as Australians and belief that we will seize this opportunity to reimagine ourselves and remake ourselves as a nation. This is the profound gift that the Uluru Statement from the Heart gives to all of us. The statement continues. Proportionally, we are the most incarcerated people on the planet. We are not an innately criminal people. Our children are aliened from their families at unprecedented rates. This cannot be because we have no love for them. And our youth languish in detention in obscene numbers. They should be our hope for the future. These dimensions of our crisis tell plainly the structural nature of our problem. This is the torment of our powerlessness. It would be sadly very easy for me to rattle off a series of statistics that sit behind those words, but instead I'm going to explain the two elements that make these structural problems. These two elements have been on show in the first week of Parliament every year for the last 10 years in the tabling of the Closing the Gap report. This year, Prime Minister Turnbull reported that only 3 out of 7 of the targets aimed at reducing Indigenous disadvantage were on track. The employment gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians is actually getting wider. The laws, the policies, the programs and the services aimed at addressing these issues are just not working. And while there are some successes, the current system is in need of comprehensive reform. This failing is the first element of the structural nature of our problem. The second element is harder to see, but it is actually more pervasive. It is the lack of outrage that accompanies this systemic bipartisan failure. It's the shrug of the shoulders that just accepts that the place of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in this country is and always will be at the bottom of the pile. It is the morning breakfast TV hosts that suggest that maybe the stolen generations weren't such a bad thing after all. And it is the carefully considered voice to Parliament that is answered with the appointment of Tony Abbott as the Special Envoy for Indigenous Affairs. In response to these structural problems, the statement proposes 3 structural reforms. The statement continues. We seek constitutional reforms to empower our people and take a rightful place in our own country. When we have power over our destiny, our children will flourish. They will walk in 2 worlds, and their culture will be a gift to their country. We call for the establishment of a First Nations body enshrined in the Constitution. Makarrata is the culmination of our agenda, the coming together after a struggle. It represents our aspirations for a fair and truthful relationship with the people of Australia and a better future for our children based on justice and self-determination. We seek a Makarrata Commission to supervise a process of agreement making between governments and First Nations and truth-telling about our history. The Voice to Parliament proposal is the only one that requires a constitutional change and will need a vote of you, the Australian people, in a referendum to succeed. There are no silver bullets for the challenges facing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but we have consistently advocated for political representation and genuine self-determination for many decades. We know that the solutions to these challenges will be more effective and more productive when we have a closer say over them. The Voice will not diminish the authority of the Parliament, but will enhance its effectiveness. It is fair to say it needs some help. In the 10 years of the Closing the Gap strategy, we have seen 6 Prime Ministers and 27 Premiers and Chief Ministers come and go. It is hard to take a generational view on issues like children and out-of-home care with that sort of disruption. We need the continuity and certainty of a constitutionally enshrined First Nations voice to Parliament to ensure that critical decisions are informed by First Nations who are closest to the challenges. The constitutional protection is really, really important. We have seen many representative bodies rise and fall in the past. They were all vulnerable to changes in the political climate, but the problems still remain. Just putting this through a normal legislation process, a voice to Parliament through a normal legislation process, is repeating the mistakes of the past, and I'll be back here in 20 years dusting off the same talk. The voice to Parliament will scrutinise policy and legislation and will improve the ability of the Parliament to make good laws about us. It will be a strong representative voice that will benefit not just to the Parliament, but to the business and social sectors in ongoing reform. It is a pragmatic and productive proposal. The other structural reform proposed is a Makarrata Commission to lead to agreement making and truth telling. This does not require a change to the Constitution like the voice to Parliament. The Makarrata Commission will guide the process of settling the relationship between the sovereignty of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander First Nations and that of the Crown. It will establish a national treaty framework that will guide the process of negotiations across the country to give some consistency. The Makarrata Commission will also establish a truth-telling process about our nation's history. While we honour our involvement in foreign wars, we turn a blind eye to the frontier wars and the violence that heralded the British colonisation of this country. Some of these conflicts are not that old and our people remember them. Delegates at the Cairns Dialogue remember the midnight raid by Queensland police at Mapoon in 1963, the forced removal of its residents and the burning of their homes to the ground. Truth-telling is not about apportioning blame or generating guilt, but it is the clear realisation that deep reconciliation in this country is impossible without also knowing and naming the truth of our shared history. The statement concludes, in 1967 we were counted. In 2017 we seek to be heard. We leave base camp and start our trek across this vast country. We invite you to walk with us in a movement of the Australian people for a better future. This is our moment to make our own history, one that acknowledges the past properly and imagines a greater future. A future that connects us to each other through truth, love and belief, and binds us as a nation to this land and its ancient story. The invitation is here. This is our moment to decide what our legacy is going to be. Tell this story to others. Start a conversation about the promise of our shared identity. Express your support at uluruforall.com. Write to your MPs, both state and federal. They need your encouragement. Put a submission to the Joint Select Committee that is currently examining the voice to Parliament and tell them you want your voice heard in a referendum as soon as possible. Let's just get this done. Side by side, let us walk together in a movement of the Australian people.
Okay, thank you so much. So the next section is going to be a presentation from our Policy Development Committee, who've actually developed a position statement on the voice and what our perspective is on it. Michael, would you like to take it away?
Thank you, Miles. So I don't have slides for this, but I'll be keeping this relatively brief. So since
sorry, just quickly, you have screen share permissions if you need it.
Okay. So I can share what we do have on the website currently, potentially, but I mostly just had some notes on it that I would be going through, and I will be keeping this relatively brief. So, yeah, since the early formation of Fusion, we have maintained the position from most of the constituent parties supporting the Uluru Statement from the Heart as a first step to better representation, including a treaty. Following the referendum announcement, the PDC spent some time a number of months ago working on a more detailed position statement and somewhat of a response to both the yes and no campaigns. This can be read in the news section of the website. And one of our goals here was really to look at both sides, and especially for the no campaign, try to understand and address them sort of directly, as at the time there was a feeling amongst contributors that sort of in the PDC and outside that both sides were often talking past each other and not really engaging in conversation. So we acknowledged that in the statement that there are two very separate no campaigns. One does come from a number of prominent First Nation figures, that the changes are tokenistic and won't really achieve real change. Now, we're respectful and sympathetic to this view. However, we do believe the voice would be a positive step forward, and a failure of the referendum itself will really likely shut down any momentum towards real change. So that's one of the sort of strong reasons why we are for it. Now, for the other part, there is sort of an overarching point that we touched on, but could be articulated more, but is that the change is being made out to be a lot more complicated than it needs to be. Sort of as Simon sort of demonstrated in the section earlier and in that TED talk, all of the things you'll see when you look into the details, it is very, very simple. The constitutional change states that there's an advisory body. We have currently and have had multiple scattered advisory bodies, and we've had various ones in the past that have been created and shut down based on the political whims. And all of this does is just make sure that there will be one maintained by the government in some capacity. That's the constitutional change there is. Now, a significant portion of the No campaign does, so we believe, make unsubstantiated claims about the voice, and so it tries to play on some fears such as lack of detail or that it will divide the country by race. But these are mostly issues we believe to sort of that are of the No campaign's own design. And the constitutional change leaves most of the detail to the government, which is the way it is now. And Australia is the only developed nation with a settler history, which does not have a treaty with Indigenous peoples. So the PDC believes quite strongly that enshrining greater representation shouldn't be divisive and really is a sort of a fair and make a sensible first step towards real change. So there is a lot more information and sort of detail on this position on the website, as you can see. So you can go to the news dropdown, and then there's a Indigenous Voice to Parliament section there dedicated to this. So we welcome anyone to jump in and have a look at that and come through and provide us any feedback or any further questions or things. I believe that is sort of part of what will be covered in the next section. So I'll hand over back to Miles.
Thank you very much. And if I could briefly abuse my privilege as host to highlight a specific point from the position statement, which I think is very important. There is, in fact, a reference. One of the very common arguments from the No campaign is that there's no structure or proposal in what the voice would look like. Well, our position statement explicitly references what's referred to as the Karma-Langton co-design report. I'm sorry, I don't have a date from that, but it does offer a proposal for the structure of what the voice would look like if the referendum passes. And to very briefly summarize it, the National Voice would have 25 members with guaranteed gender balance, and it would include 2 members from each state, as well as the Northern Territory, the ACT, and the Torres Strait. There'll be a further 5 members to represent remote areas due to their unique needs, which includes Northern Territory, Western Australia, Queensland, South Australia, and New South Wales. There would be an additional member to represent the significant population of Torres Strait Islanders serving on the mainland. Each member of the board would serve 4-year terms, with half the membership determined every 2 years, and a term limit of 2 consecutive terms for each member. And there would also be 2 co-chairs of a different gender to be selected by the voice members every 2 years, and the members would be democratically elected. So thank you very much, Michael. And I highly encourage anyone who is interested in learning more to go to the links that we've placed in chat on our website. That is, or to find it through the main menu. And I'd also take the moment to highly encourage anyone who is interested in policy development for the party, either to learn more about the process or to participate in the process for this and similar issues in future, to please reach out to Michael or reach out to the committee to get involved. So the next section will be going into the final breakout for the evening. And before we go in, the 2 prompt questions for the breakouts will be, what did you notice or learn anything from these videos and speakers? Is question 1, and question 2 is is there anything else or any other resources or anything else you'd like to need to learn or hear from, or any people you'd like to hear from in order to feel more confident about the voice referendum or the voice treaty truth process?
Would anyone like to share what they noticed or learned from watching the video?
I shared a few of my thoughts in the chat. I thought that was a very beautiful video. And it would be really good to see more of that content out there, because he really explained his connection to it. And I think the very positive message that we can say about it is it's really tying Australia's cultural history, which I think we have to just recognize. There's nothing political about that. It's just history and culture and the Constitution, and as well replicating what other countries across the world have already done with their Indigenous communities. I think that poetic look really appeals to me. I'm not sure if it appeals to everyone, but ultimately I see it as the Constitution is recognising Indigenous Australians, and I think we can't dispute that. So yeah.
Yeah, great. Yeah. Anyone else?
Well, I am a little bit biased because I had actually seen that video a few times before, but it's one of those really detailed ones that you can watch again and get slightly different things each time. And there was a very specific word he said, which was actually has a huge amount of meaning behind it. That was the word Chukopa. And I've actually been to Mudajul, I've been to Uluru in Northern Territory and walked through that, and it's utterly different from everywhere else in Australia in a really profound way. And the word Chukopa comes from the Anangu people in the middle of Northern Territory, and it's kind of a catch-all for the religious philosophy, the law, the culture. It's all very much sort of entwined and interconnected together, along with that connection to the land. And so, without sort of universalizing across all the different peoples, but there's a lot of really interesting ideas that are sort of captured in there, and one of those is how storytelling is deeply entwined in everything they do, and that's something that really speaks to me, which comes up again and again, where more so than just sort of this cold hard data-based analysis of here are the numbers, here's the rational approach. For me, it's more, what is the story that we want to tell, and who is interested in listening to that story, and how can we sort of tell that story together? Because storytelling is one of the oldest sort of human professions on the planet, and so for me, it's listening and telling stories is kind of like the number one thing that I keep coming back to again and again and again, more than anything else, as something that I feel a sort of a deep pull to.
Yeah, it was interesting. I've read about the Uluru Statement from the Heart lots of times, and that, the how it was done and how profound it was. But hearing it first person for someone who was so embedded in it was really, really moving and fascinating. Yeah. Labor hadn't created it introduced the voice with such mystery. It just didn't say it's an advisory body. There are other advisory bodies. We're putting it in the Constitution because every other time, the Libs always axe those advisory bodies. That's all they needed to say. But now the LNP can project whatever they want on it because they've been so nebulous about it.
So there was another prompt question there as well. That is there anywhere else we'd be interested in hearing from to learn more? And from my perspective, there's a lot of I've talked a lot with Queensland First Nations people, and Northern Territory as well, because I've spent some time over there. But one thing which I haven't is the First Nations people from other states and territories, and one in particular I'd like to learn more from is more Torres Strait Islander people. And because they live a very, very different lifestyle to most of us. Most of us are on the coastline of the continent, but they're all on the hundreds of tiny islands. Some of them with a population of a few people, a few dozen people. And I do have an opportunity to potentially go up there in the next few years to live and work as a teacher, And so that's something that's sort of been on my plan. So that's something that I've sort of been looking at possibly doing more of. But another option is for me is going and spending some time in a remote Indigenous community. So those are things I've sort of considered doing and have as an option. And even if I wouldn't go into one of the really remote ones, because it is pretty hard out there to come in as an outsider, but just to move up north and be nearer to the coast and out in regional areas, because I think most of us are from developed urban centers, and so it tends to really pigeonhole the kind of experience in the community and the people we get to know.
That everyone I know has done that. It's been pretty profound for.
Has anyone encountered some conversations where people were very confident and bold with their no? And has there been any sort of experiences personally with that? I had one today, actually. God.
I've had a few with the progressive no vote, and I get the progressive no vote, but these are from settlers. I don't know why. I just think as a settler, you've got to. It's just you can't vote no. But there are some, this one person said she went to the the Canberra
Tent Embassy, Aboriginal Tent Embassy.
Tent Embassy, and they said to vote no. And so she's gonna vote no. Yeah, it struck me also though, she was someone who became very kind of fringe during COVID in Victoria. So yeah, it was kind of a whole package. Yeah.
So on Tuesday next week, we are running our regular volunteer induction for how to get started in the party, both in event organizing, in engagement organizing, comms, all of that stuff. So that'll be on Zoom at 7 p.m., 8 p.m. next Tuesday. And all the details are on our website. Please RSVP to that, because we're doing some really exciting stuff. And the other big thing that's coming up is on October the 20th, where we're actually kicking off soon. We're hoping to kick off our state branches, our new state branches. We're going to need help organizing those on a local level. We need volunteers to come in and help to coordinate volunteers, train volunteers, but mostly to organize events at a local level. And so the big meeting would have got a big call out for volunteers soon, but the big meeting will be on the 20th, and please do RSVP for that as well. And I'd love to see you guys there. So I guess in closing, we've done things very, very differently, a lot differently. I really hope it went well and everyone got something out of tonight. Please do fill out that survey if you get a chance. All the questions are optional, so you can skip them. And I'd also love to open the floor as well for anyone who wants to say any follow-up. Otherwise, in a few minutes, I'd love to have a volunteers meeting / debrief, mostly with Drew, but everyone else is welcome to hang around too.
Thank you so much, Miles. That was really awesome. So
thanks, Miles. That was really good. Yeah.
Great.
Bye.
Thanks, Bryony.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
you.